where are things that you're struggling to get clarity around or struggling to share? Those tend to be really kind of easy areas to start with, because when you start to put your thoughts down on paper visually, it really starts to bring clarity around. It helps you understand it more, helps the people you're explaining it to, helps them understand it more. It's not about how pretty your drawing is. It really doesn't matter. It's about going through that process of visualizing it. And that also helps you think and look at it from a different perspective.
Today on Strategy Shorts, I'm joined by Marcus DeVale, a visual facilitator. Now, I'm not going to try and explain what that is. So Marcus, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and what you're doing in the facilitator space?
All right. Thanks, Dan. I'm really happy to be here. So visual facilitation, bits of an odd ones, people who aren't familiar with it. But basically what we do is we're facilitation, but we add visuals on top. So we basically try to enhance and amplify everything by using visuals. So basically think of it like you're showing you're working out. So rather than trying to solve a sum, doing it all in your head, you're visualizing everything that you do so you can gain clarity around it, see more connections and solve problems more efficiently, collaborate more effectively.
Awesome. So you guys are really evangelists for visual thinking, really. And I know that this started out as a family enterprise, and now that you're the head honcho these days. But tell us about that journey. How did this company come to exist? Because it's quite a unique take on how to bring things to life, how to bring projects to life, and how to visualize things. So I'm interested to hear a little bit more about that journey.
So it started with my dad, who was a consultant, and he worked the consulting space for years. And at some point he started to get, really frustrated with basically kind of the way things were done. He found it really kind of like going into a sea of fog. He just couldn't really make sense of things. And he found that stuff just wasn't really hitting. A lot of things were falling flat. So he, was very kind of artistic in his younger years. So he just started basically visualizing things as he worked. So he started just doing it for himself, not even as, really part of the job. But then people started focusing on it and really talking about it. And he started to incorporate it more and more into his consulting work and just started getting really better and better results. And everyone starts to come to him asking him to, make the visuals really a core part of the way he worked. So when he did that, he eventually sort of left and started Work Visible. And that's when I joined on. I've got an artistic background as well. So I joined in the visual thinking side, sort of learned from him things about facilitation, things about using visuals in this way. Then he kept the consulting going and I'd be focused on really the kind of visual thinking side. So we'd sort of do things like he would be creating a workshop. He'd be like, right, how can we get more out of this by using some visual thinking? And we'd collaborate on that. I'd also run sort of trainings on visual thinking. And then last year, he sadly passed really suddenly. And I continued the visual thinking side of the business and brought my sister on as well to sort of help with the marketing and that side of things. She's also getting trained up in visual thinking herself.
Well, I'm obviously very, very sorry to hear that you guys have had to adjust to this new world in the way that you have. But what's been really exciting for me is as we've had a few connection points now kind of in our network, and seeing how you've carried the torch for this work and how you're bringing it to life and illustrating this visual approach to project work with people. It's really interesting. It's really, really exciting. And I noticed from the website that you've got some really interesting big international clients like Amex and Amazon and MasterCard, big brands like that. And I'm curious to understand, how do they respond when they kind of see this new approach to thinking and laying out challenges? Like, is it a bit of a light bulb moment for them? Do you kind of see like the sparkle in their eyes as they see a new way of looking at things? Like, how do they kind of switch onto this?
So it's a really interesting, obviously varies from client to client, but one thing we sort of tend to encounter is people who either come to us and they're already really sold on it. They're really sold on the idea and they like can't wait to get started. This comes to them very naturally. And then the other side, particularly, we have this quite a lot with training. Say we've got a client who puts through, a team, and some people are just like, why are we on this training? And they'll start the first stage, it's like, what are we doing here? What's the point in this? Like this seem like, just get me to draw it and work. Like, why are we doing this? But then by the end of, the second day of the training, they all kind of start to really realize the value of and how much it can sort of solve problems and eliminate a lot of the communication errors that we just do without even really realizing. Something to talk about a lot is just people think they're being really clear when they're communicating. They're saying something really simple, yet everyone else has a completely different idea in their head of what's being said. If you can literally show them this is what I'm thinking, it's much more difficult for that to happen. And also, if there is any sort of problems with communication there, you can literally point and be like, okay, that part of the drawing, tell me about that. I don't understand that bit. And it guides the conversation much more. So the way people use it is really sort of wide and varied, but I'd say people tend to really take to it once they've seen it in action. It's really getting people exposed to it and seeing it being done is then when people start to really notice the power that it can have.
So I know that in the remainder of this episode, you've been thinking about something to bring to the Strategy Shorts audience, something that's short, practical, something that they can experiment with. But before we get to that, I just wanted to acknowledge that what I love about the story of Work Visible Studios as a brand is how this emerged from a natural passion point. I think sometimes lots of people, when they're approaching their careers or perhaps they're thinking of launching their own business, often thinking, I need to find a thing that's going to please the audience. And so often, when people are just doing the things they love to do, that's when they start to gather people around those ideas, or they start to attract like minded people, or they start to attract people who are thinking, is there another way to do this kind of work that I haven't considered before? And so, what I really love about your story and your dad's influence on that is just that he was doing, and then you were doing what you already love to do, which naturally shone a light for other people to follow. So I think it's a lovely story. It's a lovely way into this great brand that you've now built. And I'm really happy to see big brands like the ones we spoke before responding to it, being challenged by it, helping them to align around their objectives and their ideas in new ways. I just think that's really, really interesting. But as I said, you've been thinking about something to bring to the audience today. And before we get to that, there is going to be some visual elements to this, right? So, for anyone who's listening to this episode on one of the podcast platforms, don't worry, have a look at the show notes. The link is going to be in there so you can watch the video of this episode so you can see what we're doing. But, Marcus, just before you tell us what you're going to be talking about, give us an idea of who you're talking to regarding this framework.
So for me, this is just something that basically anybody can use. It's one of the reasons I chose this. I think it's a really valuable thing to do for anybody because really it's all just about how can you get more out of what you're doing? How can you create more value from what you're already doing? And really just a simple framework around asking that question and making sure that you're getting the most out of the actions that you're doing.
Awesome. Well, let's take a look. And I think there's going to be some camera trickery that's going to allow people to see what you're doing. So I'm excited. Bit of an experiment for us.
All right. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to change cameras and show you the leverage layout, which is basically a simple way to explore different actions you can take, how much effort they're going to be, and look at the predicted value of what those actions can provide. All right. So we're going to look at a simple framework that you can use to get more leverage out of what you're doing. So I'm going to just draw this out here. I'm going to start by just doing a curvy line across the bottom there, and then do a little triangle in and a couple of lines to create our lever here. I'll just extend these a little bit. And then the way I like to do this is up at the top, I write whatever it is that we're working on or going to be working on. So let's say for this example, we're creating a visual value proposition for a company. So we're going to visualize it to basically make it clearer to their clients. Whenever I talk and write, I lose all ability to spell. But I put that up at the top there. And then the idea here is on the left, I'm going to draw an arrow down. And this is basically where you're going to write different ideas of things you could do. So the effort you're going to put in. And then over here, I'm going to do another arrow. And this is going to be the output or the sort of predicted value that doing this action is going to provide. So then what we do is basically just we're doing this visual value proposition and just brainstorming the left, what are some things that we could do to either, bring more value to our clients or bring more value to us as a business. So one thing that happens when we're doing these is we're always doing a final version. So one thing that comes to mind that we could do is we could just stick the camera on while we're doing that, hit record, and then we could send that off to the client. So I could put over here on the right, we're going to record this, and we're going to send that to clients, and they'll be able to then show that video to their customers. And I like to just label these as well, keep it nice and clear. So that's one idea of what we could do. The second idea was maybe something we could do be say to, at the end, we do a before and after. So we show what their value proposition was like before, and then we show what it could look like after. So for before and after here. And then on the right, what value do I think that would provide? Well, it just really emphasize the sort of change that's happened. So that's how valuable to clients, emphasize the change. So that's another idea that we could do there. And one thing I want to point out as I'm doing this, something that's really common that people run into with visual thinking is getting caught up in the drawing being nice. You can see how messy this all is. It's not about the drawing, it's about getting everything down and just visualizing it so that you can see it. So we've got a couple of ideas here. You could do recordings, send that to a client, could do before and after that emphasize the change for the client. Maybe something else we could do is we could take that before and after of the value prop. So I'm just going to put B and A, and we could send that to all our current clients. Send to all, so right, very small down here, send that to all clients. And then that might lead to, some meetings and some business for us. Or maybe we could take that recording, something else we could do is we could take that recording and we could then send that off to clients, or we could even do this would be more effort here. We could do, say, a free, let's say, webinar on visualizing your value proposition. And we could invite a whole bunch of new potential clients to that. So we could have new client meetings. And this is basically the idea. You go back and forth from side to side, brainstorming out different ideas. What could we put in? And then what could the value be on the other side? And then one thing I like to do to kind of organize this a little bit is at the end, I usually like to set this up by color, is just on these to make it a bit clearer. So just put a little bit of estimation of effort. So in the one here, recording this, that's going to be super low effort, just hitting records, but the value it provides that could be really valuable to the client. So I might fill that up to about here. Likewise, doing the before and after are going to be super low effort for us. Is it going to be as valuable as the client? It'll emphasize the change, but not quite as much. Maybe that just gets a little one there. Sending the email to all the clients, that's going to be to all past clients. That's going to be really low effort, and that could be, quite a high value thing for us to do. Free webinar, putting that, and that's going to be pretty high effort. Quite a lot goes into that, but also that could be quite a high value activity. So that's the way we do it, essentially. Putting down your ideas, think, what can you put in, what can you get out of that, and just going through and grading it. And the way we like to do it sort of here, Emily and I, when we're working on this, is we'll both sort of draw this out individually. We'll work alone, then we'll come together and we'll talk about what were the different ideas that we had and which ones you think are worth doing. So it's just a simple way to explore those possibilities whenever you're doing a new project or a new idea.
Marcus, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Great to get a unique take, because normally I'm just talking to someone face to face. So that was really interesting for me to see as well. And I love how simple you've made it to really think through the kinds of inputs that any activity are going to require versus the value you might get out at the end. And sometimes those things might be really imbalanced, but actually through that creative process, you might sometimes realize that, hey, this activity that we're considering is going to be loads of effort, but it's not going to be a lot of return. And so I think that the process of simplifying things visually is going to really help people think things through. And I love what you were saying there about how you and Emily sometimes work alone to start this process to really get your ideas out on paper before coming back together and discussing them to kind of figure out what might work well in your context. Now, as you know, we love to finish with something really practical for people to do. And obviously that leverage layout is a really simple way for people to begin exploring. But when this episode finishes and people are starting to consider how they approach this, what's the one thing that you would do first? Like, where would you begin as you experiment with this new approach?
So it's a really wide topic, so it can vary quite a lot depending on person to person. What I would say is a really good thing to do is if you're going to start using visual thinking in what you do is to look and say, where are things that you're struggling to get clarity around or struggling to share? Those tend to be really kind of easy areas to start with because when you start to put your thoughts down on paper visually, it really starts to bring clarity around it, helps you understand it more, helps the people you're explaining it to, helps them understand it more. So I'd say really start there. Take what you've struggling to either communicate or gain clarity around and just say, if I had to draw this in like a really simple way, how would I do it? And one thing I really always want to stress with this is it's not about how pretty your drawing is. It really doesn't matter. You can see from the example there, super scribbly, super scrawly. Doesn't matter. That's not the point. It's about kind of going through that process of visualizing it. And that also helps you think and look at it from a different perspective.
Marcus, that's about all the time that we've got for today's episode. But thank you so much for making some time for the show. It's great to get such a unique perspective and something so tactile that people can get involved with and try. Because lots of the time we're dealing with frameworks and theories, but actually getting a piece of paper and grabbing a pen to help your creative process, I think lots of people are going to really, really appreciate. So thank you so much. Let's speak again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on, Dan. It was really great to do. And I love what you're doing with this series.